One of the most important parts of your bike is your brake. The brake is the only thing that's going to slow you down when you need to. Today, we're going to talk about hydraulic disc brakes. There's a few main things that we can do when we need to repair the brake. It can be re-bleeding the brake, as in replacing the hydraulic fluid in there. It can be realigning the caliper where the pads sit in relation to the rotor, or it could be cleaning or replacing worn out parts. When I say cleaning, I mean decontaminating. Let's have a look. If the lever feels spongy or when you pull it, the caliper isn't activating and something feels wrong with the brake, it might be worth taking it into your local bike shop to get them to re-bleed it or repair whatever needs to be repaired. If you'd like to know more, mention it in the comments below and we might be able to do a video on how to bleed your brakes as well. One of the ways that you can tell if the brake system is contaminated is simply by the sound of it. You might be braking and you can hear a metallic scraping noise where the backing of the brake pad is pushing up against the brake rotor and it's rubbing metal on metal. That's bad. Or it could even be making like a squealing, like a howling wolf sort of noise. It's horrible. I don't have any bikes in the shop at the moment that have a contaminated brake, but trust me, you'll know if it's contaminated. There's a couple of things we can do to clean the contaminants. Bikey wipes here make these Rotor wipes as well. They're really heavy in alcohol, and alcohol is really good in the way that it can dry very quickly. So we can clean the brake rotor, clean the brake pads, and that'll give us our best chance to bring that brake system back to life. But of course, sometimes it's too far gone and it's just worth replacing, because with your brakes, you don't get a second chance if they don't work. If your brake needs aligning, this is how you'll know. If you spin the wheel, hopefully it should be able to spin smoothly, but you can see that this one's stopping under its own power. That's because the caliper is misaligned. That means that the caliper, or the brake pads I suppose, are rubbing on the rotor when we should have a little bit of room between the two so that that can keep spinning. It's not causing any friction in there. This one needs an alignment. Before aligning the caliper, have a look at what tool you'll need. If we look really closely, there's two bolts. There's a top bolt and a bottom bolt. Have a look at both of them. What tool do you need? For this particular example, we need a 5mm Allen key, which is just gonna slot nice and safely into that bolt there, both top and bottom. What we're doing here is we're balancing the top and bottom bolts. We can loosen both of these bolts just a tiny amount. You shouldn't need to do it much more than about that amount to be able to move the caliper with your hand. Sometimes you might need to loosen the opposite bolt as well so that you can actually twist the caliper, otherwise it might be a little bit too tight. To align the caliper, there's lots of different ways that you can do it. Some people choose to loosen both bolts, hold the brake really tight and then tighten it. I personally choose to just use my eyes. So I tend to look down inside the actual brake caliper, straight down the line of the rotor, and I'm just trying to make sure that I can see daylight on both sides of the rotor between where the pads are. So I can see that in this particular example, the caliper is sitting a little bit biased towards non-drive side. So I can just move the whole caliper a little bit further across towards drive side. When I say a little bit, I mean fractions of a millimeter. Tiny amounts will make a big adjustment, but we're just gonna use our eye and adjust it accordingly. So again, at the moment, I can hear it. You might not be able to hear it in the camera, but I can hear that it's rubbing. So I'm just going to, with my eye, I'm going to say that I need to push it to the side a little bit like that. So we're just going to move it a tiny bit further again. And then hopefully it should be able to spin nice and freely. Now the wheel doesn't have any issues that are stopping it from spinning nice and freely. It's as easy as that when we're talking about aligning the caliper. One thing, a little tip that I might quickly mention that I was doing there is when I was looking at the brake rotor, this might seem a little bit silly, but I was resting my forehead on the actual tire. I do that to keep my eyes perfectly level so they're not moving around, you know, my head's not shaking around. So I was just resting my head on the tire while I can see where I needed to adjust it to. A little pro tip that I've learned over the years. One thing that we were lucky enough with this one though, is that this one had a perfect brake rotor. The brake rotor is in really good condition. Sometimes they might be a little bit bent or kinked. So you might spin it and it goes tss, 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 each different rotation of the wheel. So we might need to straighten out the brake rotor. We can talk about that as well. Here at the bike shop, we've got a trusty little tool here. This one can slot straight over the brake rotor and we can bend it back however we need to, whether we want to bend it that way or bend it that way at different sections of the rotor. If you don't have one of these tools, you can also use your trusty little shifter spanner as well. Although it's not ideal, it might get you out of trouble before bringing it in for a service. Another pro tip that I've got when aligning the caliper is when we're looking down through the caliper, sometimes it's hard to see daylight on both sides because the ground might be a really dark color. A trick that I've learned over the years is if I grab a nice white piece of paper and I put that down behind the brake rotor or behind the caliper, wherever it needs to be, I should be able to see that white piece of paper in high contrast to the rest of the caliper or the brake pads even. So it makes it easier to see what you need to see. So grabbing a little white piece of paper might help you out too. So hopefully you learned a little bit about how to maintain your brakes in this video. If you've got any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below, or better still, come into the bike shop and we can help you out with your specific bike. We're happy to help out with brake bleeding, with realigning caliper, whatever your bike needs, we're more than happy to help. Thanks guys, see ya.